I was looking for my Grammy's ring when I found him. Grammy had given me her ring before she died, and losing it felt like losing her all over again. It was a simple silver band with a tiny blue stone, nothing expensive, nothing that would catch a thief's eye, but it was mine. It was the only thing I had left of her, the only proof that someone in this world had loved me unconditionally. Mom forgot to pay the electricity bill again, and I only felt safe with that ring on my finger, a small circle of protection against the darkness that seemed to swallow our house whole every night. I will say, as a child, our house was always dark. I did get used to it eventually, the way you get used to anything when you have no other choice. Our neighbors had porch lights that stayed on all night, warm yellow glows that promised safety and normalcy. We had shadows and the faint smell of mildew that never quite went away. Mom couldn't afford electricity most months, so we usually sat in candlelight, when we had candles, or in complete darkness when we didn't. The wax drippings created strange landscapes on our kitchen table, mountain ranges of white and cream that no one bothered to scrape away. But when Mom passed out after drinking too much, which was most nights, my brother Ross and I were stuck in that darkness, two kids trying to navigate a house full of sharp corners and forgotten obstacles. Grammy's ring was the only thing that made me feel safe in those long, dark hours. I would twist it around my finger, feeling the cool metal, imagining Grammy's warm hands placing it there. She had held my hand when she gave it to me, her papery skin soft against mine, and whispered, "This will keep you safe, Frankie. Promise me you'll never take it off." I had broken that promise. I knew I was wearing it in the yard while playing in the flowers after school, digging in the dirt and pretending I was an archaeologist discovering lost treasures. The thought of a night without it twisted my gut into knots so tight I could barely breathe. The sun was setting fast, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so terrified of the coming darkness. Before she passed, my grandma was our unofficial guardian, the only adult who actually cared whether we lived or died. After school, Ross and I would walk all the way to her house on a 40-minute trek that took us through neighborhoods that got progressively nicer, and she would make us dinner and let us watch TV. Real dinner, not the cold cereal or stale crackers we got at home. Pot roast with potatoes, spaghetti with meatballs, chicken soup that actually had chicken in it, and TV glorious, bright, moving pictures that proved there was a world beyond our dark house. But after she died from a stroke that took her in the middle of making us chocolate chip cookies, we didn't have anyone. Just Mom and her bottles, and a pitch-dark house that felt like it was actively trying to swallow us whole. The sky was darkening when I rushed outside, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, kneeling in Mom's flower garden. The dirt was cold and damp, seeping through my pajama pants. Ross, my brother, sometimes locked me out if I stayed out too long, and I knew I was pushing my luck. The streetlight 3 houses down flickered on, a reminder that other people had light, had power, had normal lives. His fear of keeping the door unlocked stemmed from our father coming home from work when we were younger and destroying the kitchen if his dinner wasn't made. Dad would throw plates, punch holes in walls, overturn furniture like a hurricane contained in human skin. Ross was only 7 when he learned that an unlocked door was an invitation for disaster. Not much to say about Dad except that he was the kind of man who made you understand why some people shouldn't have children. He left us a year later, when Ross was 8 and I was 6. Yes, he took all Mom's savings of $3,000. She'd been hiding in a coffee can for emergencies. But the house was quiet after that. Terrifyingly quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you realize screaming and violence at least proved someone was paying attention to you. Sometimes I intentionally sat in the yard at night, even when it was cold enough to see my breath. Our neighbors, the Hendersons, usually watched TV at 8 p.m., and I could see the reflection in their front window if I positioned myself just right. I once watched a whole episode of a TV show this way, my face pressed against our chain-link fence, my fingers going numb from the cold. I had no idea what the show was about, but I think it was about space, with astronauts and stars and places far away from here. Places where little girls didn't have to sit in other people's yards to see a TV screen. On that particular night, the night I found Jude, it was too cold to sit outside for long. It was early October, and Pennsylvania autumn nights had teeth. I was wearing Mom's coat over my pajamas, a ratty thing that smelled like cigarettes and desperation, grasping my flashlight with fingers already going numb. The battery was dying, the light growing dimmer with each passing minute, but it was all I had. Ross's face was in the window, lit up by Mom's phone, which was also our only reliable light source since she kept it charged in her car. He was making faces at me, probably laughing, his breath fogging up the glass. I gestured frantically for him to leave the door open, my movements exaggerated so he could see them in the dying light. He just pressed his face against the glass, making kissy faces, his features distorted and monstrous against the glowing screen behind him. Ever since Dad left, my brother insisted on being the male of the house, repeating what Dad would always say in that booming voice that made the walls shake. Ross was 9 years old, and already turning into a tiny dictator, drunk on the small amount of power he thought he had. When we did have electricity, maybe once every 3 or 4 months, when Mom managed to scrape together enough money, my brother would force me to microwave him frozen meals because he was the male of the house now that Dad was gone. He would sit on the couch like a king on a throne, pointing at the kitchen, demanding Hot Pockets and pizza rolls, while I stood on a step stool to reach the microwave buttons. I wasn't expecting him to leave the door unlocked that night, which meant another night of crawling up the drain pipe and through my bedroom window, risking a broken neck every time my foot slipped on the wet metal. I had gotten good at it, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. I focused on Grammy's ring, pushing all other thoughts away. The ring was small. The flower bed was small. It had to be here somewhere. Kneeling in the flowers, I grasped at anything I could find: rocks, pebbles, crumbling flower buds that released their papery petals at my touch, old beer, cans that Mom had thrown from the porch. My fingers were filthy, caked with dirt that gathered under my fingernails in thick black crescents. A voice startled me, high-pitched and indignant, and I almost toppled over backwards. "It's over here!" The squeak came from somewhere near a wilted rose, its petals brown and drooping. I briefly wondered if I was seeing things, if maybe I'd been breathing in something I shouldn't have. Bobby, one of my friends in elementary school, once bragged that his father ate mushrooms and thought he was a bird for 6 hours, flapping his arms and trying to fly off their porch roof. I became fascinated with the idea, and Bobby and I spent a whole slumber party Googling psychedelic mushrooms on his mom's computer, reading trip reports and looking at pictures of people's dilated pupils. I vaguely remembered my mother planting mushrooms in the yard when we were younger, but they were the edible kind, the ones she used in her winter soup before she stopped cooking altogether. So, if I wasn't seeing things from some stray spore floating through the air, if I wasn't high on something growing in our neglected yard, then what exactly did I hear? "Hello? I'm sorry? Are you blind? I'm down here." The voice was sharp, annoyed, distinctly male and distinctly not coming from inside my head. All I could see was my mother's flower bed, a tangle of weeds and dying plants that she'd given up on years ago. I shined my flashlight on it, the weak beam barely penetrating the shadows, peering closer until my nose was practically touching the dirt. And there, when I crawled directly into a crushed rosebush that scratched at my arms and face, was a glowing ball of light about the size of a marble. I found myself mesmerized by it, hypnotized by light that I wasn't used to seeing outside of other people's houses. It pulsed like a heartbeat, warm and alive, nothing like the cold electric lights I glimpsed through neighbors' windows. Whipping my head around, I searched for my brother. His shadow was gone from the window. Good. This was mine, whatever it was. Closer now, barely breathing, the ball of light morphed into something impossible. A tiny human perched on a leaf, legs swinging casually like he was sitting on a park bench. The boy looked like a high schooler, maybe 17 or 18, with messy dark curls and glass wings poking from his back that caught the light from his own body. A scowl twisted his delicate features, making him look both beautiful and dangerous. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I blinked hard, squeezed my eyes shut and opened them again, but he was still there. Mom used to warn Ross and me about the fairies when we were little, back when she still tucked us in at night and read us stories. She said it was the fairies who stole our toys when we couldn't find them, who made us sneeze for no reason, who stole single socks from the laundry. She even said the fairies were responsible for chasing away our father, though I suspected alcohol and his own meanness had more to do with that. Ross didn't believe in them, he was too practical, too much like Dad, but I was always intrigued. I asked my friends at school if they had fairies at the bottom of their yards, and they laughed at me, called me weird, stopped inviting me to their birthday parties. I learned quickly that some truths were meant to be kept secret. I remember Mom telling us, her voice serious and her eyes sharp with something like fear, "If you do a fairy a favor, they will return it by granting you a wish. That's the law of their kind, older than time itself." But she also warned us, gripping our shoulders tight enough to bruise, her breath smelling like wine. "If you hurt a fairy, you will pay for it. You will pay, and your children will pay for it, and your children's children's children will suffer. They will hunt to the end of your bloodline, and even then their mere presence will drive adults insane. They don't forget, and they don't forgive." I wondered if she'd gotten that from a book, or if she knew from experience. Before she started drinking heavily, before Dad left and Grammy died and everything fell apart, Mom used to tell us stories about the fairies in our yard. She spoke of them like they were real, like she'd met them herself. She told us about when she was a little girl, maybe 8 years old, and she helped a captive fairy prince, freeing him from her neighbor's bell jar where he'd been trapped like an insect specimen. She said the fairy prince had granted her protection, and that's why she'd survived a car accident that should have killed her, why she'd escaped her own abusive father, why she'd found this house with its perfect yard for fairy dwellings. Maybe they were protecting her after all. Maybe that's why she was still alive despite everything. The one in front of me was scowling, his tiny arms crossed over his chest, before his expression softened into something almost friendly, almost human. "Hi," the fairy whispered, tilting his head in a gesture that was eerily bird-like. He looked maybe 17 or 18, with the kind of ageless quality that made it hard to pin down exactly. I had no idea how that translated to fairy years. Did they age like us? Were they immortal? Contrary to what books, movies, and TV shows had led me to believe Barbie, Fairytopia being my only real reference for fairy fashion, fairies didn't wear sparkly dresses or flower petals. The one in front of me was dressed in scraps of human clothing that looked like they'd been scavenged from a dumpster or stolen from a clothesline. An old checkered shirt was wrapped around his torso, held together with what looked like spider silk. Strips of denim served as pants, crudely cut and stitched. A satchel was slung across his chest, the strap made from leather that seemed too nice to be scavenged. I leaned closer, my heart pounding, and spied a clothes tag sticking from his back, white with red lettering. I squinted. Hanes. He was definitely wearing the material of one of my father's old shirts, the blue checkered one he'd left behind in his rush to abandon us. His satchel, or at least the faux leather holding it together, looked very similar to my mom's bag, the Michael Kors knockoff she'd bought at a yard sale and treasured like it was real. I don't think I fully put into words what I was seeing: a real fairy, an actual mythical creature, sitting in my mother's flower garden like it was the most natural thing in the world. My brain couldn't process it. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to girls like me. He wore a wry smile, the corner of his mouth quirking up in a way that made him look mischievous. Unlike the boys at school who teased me for having holes in my shoes and no gym uniform, who called me trailer trash, even though we lived in a house, his smile was friendly. Genuine. It reached his eyes, made them crinkle at the corners. Here's your silver thingy. He gave his curls a shake, and I saw at Grammy's ring sitting on his head like an oversized crown. Can you maybe take it off my head? It's really heavy. He stood carefully, throwing out his arms to keep balance like a tightrope walker, and slowly, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped my flashlight, I reached forward and plucked Grammy's ring from his curls. The metal was warm from his body heat, or maybe from whatever magic made him glow. Removing the ring revealed his real crown, underneath an intricate entanglement of flowers, vines, and tiny mushrooms that seemed to grow directly from his hair. It pulsed with its own faint light, organic and alive. He backed away quickly, suddenly shy, hiding behind the shadow of a rosebud that was twice his size. I'm not supposed to talk to you, he said, shifting nervously from foot to foot. His wings twitched, sending little sparkles of light into the air. I didn't tell my father I was here, so I should probably go home before he, gets mad. I found myself wondering, in a terrible fleeting thought that made me ashamed, if placing him in a bell jar and using him as a lantern would help me sleep at night. His light was so beautiful, so warm. It stole away my breath, made my chest tight with longing for something I couldn't name. The light pulsed like a living thing, spider-webbing down delicate glass wings sticking from his back in patterns that hurt to look at directly, like staring at the sun. I shook my head violently, shaking away the thought. What was wrong with me? He was a person, a thinking, feeling being, not a light bulb. But I did want to touch his light. I wanted to know if it was ice cold like firefly light, or maybe warm like a candle flame. Mom told me she had only ever held a fairy once, the prince she'd freed, and his light had felt like holding pure joy in her palm. I introduced myself, hesitantly holding out my palm, trying to keep it steady. I'm Frankie. I didn't realize I was shaking until I quickly retracted my hand, swiping my clammy fingers on my pajamas. What if he could tell I'd been thinking about trapping him? Could fairies read minds? Lit up in otherworldly golden light, his skin porcelain. Almost translucent, like I could see the delicate bones underneath. Wide green eyes blinked at me. I could see tiny veins of light running under his skin, a network of bioluminescence that made him look like a living constellation. Jude, he said, his wings twitching nervously. He hopped onto my hand, wobbling slightly and throwing his arms out to balance himself. He weighed almost nothing, like holding a moth. Prince Jude. He smiled proudly, pointing to his crown with one tiny finger. First of my name, heir to the kingdom of the rooted ones, son of King Aldrich the Eternal, guardian of the sacred flowers. And, he paused dramatically, your new friend. If you'll have me. I laughed, the sound surprising me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed. You're a prince? Reluctantly, he admitted, sitting down cross-legged in my palm. I'd rather be an explorer, but duty calls, or so my father keeps reminding me. Jude and I became friends after that night, and eventually he introduced me to his family. His father was absent, understandably so, Jude explained, because the king didn't approve of humans. He thinks you're all monsters, Jude said matter-of-factly. But you don't seem very monstrous to me. I spent a lot of time in the yard after that, every evening after school, sitting in the dirt and talking to someone who actually listened. Eventually Ross caught on because I was smiling more, seemed less miserable. He followed me one day, hiding behind the garden shed, then springing out at me when I was mid-conversation with Jude. Initially, he thought I was talking to a butterfly, probably thought I'd finally lost my mind. Ross liked Jude immediately, his eyes going wide with wonder, his 9-year-old bravado melting away. He held out his palm for the fairy to land on, gentle and careful, in a way I'd never seen him be with anything. You're real? Ross whispered, awed. You're actually real. Especially when he realized the fairy could help us with our light problem. Ross's practical mind immediately went to solutions, to ways Jude could make our lives easier. Jude said, in exchange for our full names, which he needed for fairy law reasons, Something about debts and obligations he would happily act as light for us until we fell asleep. I'd be honored, he said formally, to provide light for my human friends. I was more than happy to comply. The darkness had been crushing me, making me afraid of my own house. I gave him our names, speaking them clearly. Frankie Morrison and Ross Morrison. Jude repeated them carefully, as if committing them to memory, and from that night on, he became a regular visitor. Jude would sit on top of the microwave with his legs, swinging, illuminating the counter so we could prepare food without burning ourselves on the stove. He showed off, dancing across my dead phone screen, causing it to flicker on and off like he was conducting electricity itself. Ross was impressed, his eyes wide with childlike wonder. Wait, so you can make things actually work? Jude shrugged modestly. If there's enough of us working together? I mean, sure. Fairy light can power small things. We're basically living batteries. He said it casually, not realizing how that word batteries would lodge itself in my brother's brain. There was one night when Ross accidentally sat on him, having forgotten Jude was resting on the couch cushion. Jude squeaked in pain, a sound that pierced right through me, buzzing around like an angry mosquito, a glowing ball of light growing brighter and brighter with his distress, until the whole room was lit up. It was so bright, like an overexposed photo, light bleeding into the darkness of the hallway, lighting up the living room doorway, reaching places in our house that hadn't seen light in months. I had to shield my eyes. Ross apologized profusely, and Jude instantly forgave him with a graciousness that made me love him more. Jude spent the rest of the night telling us anecdotes of his family and world, how he had grown up as a reluctant prince. According to him, Jude didn't want to be a prince at all. However, as the son of the king, he was the rightful heir to the throne. It's not a choice, he explained. It's an obligation. When my father passes, which won't be for centuries, hopefully I'll have to rule, and I don't want to rule. I want to explore, meet new people, see new things. He looked sad when he said it, ancient beyond his years. Fairies don't like candy. I was surprised too. I grew up with Mom whispering in my ear, "Leave a berry at the bottom of the yard and perhaps a fairy will come see you." I offered Jude a chunk of gummy worm and he spat it out, immediately, making a disgusted face. That's revolting. What is that made of? Jude said his kind eat an assortment of foods, but are primarily carnivores, hunters. He showed me his teeth when I didn't believe him. Elongated spikes, dozens of them, needle sharp and meant for tearing flesh, and I wished he hadn't. They were predator teeth, the teeth of something designed to kill. I guess I was just a kid, naive and raised on Disney movies. I thought fairies were miniature versions of humans with butterfly wings and flower crowns. Cute, harmless, safe. When Mom described them in her stories, she always painted them as creatures from a fairy tale, beautiful and benevolent. I didn't expect them to have teeth sharp enough to rip through my finger like paper, to be hunters with prey drives and territorial instincts. Still, Jude was my friend. He had sharp teeth, rows and rows of them like a shark, but he didn't scare me. He'd never hurt me. I trusted him. Jude came to see me every night, sitting on my windowsill like a living nightlight, a glowing ball of orange and gold comforting me in the dark. Mom never came to tuck me in or say goodnight anymore. She was usually passed out by 7, so his light really did help. I could fall asleep watching him, feeling safe for the first time in years. When I turned 10 years old, I went to France on a school field trip for a week. It was an arts program, funded by some charity for underprivileged kids. They didn't say underprivileged directly, but I knew what they meant. Kids like me, kids with holes in their shoes. I told Ross to look after Jude, and Jude to keep an eye on my brother. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid, I told them both. I remember the France trip wasn't as fun as I thought it would be. Paris was beautiful, the Eiffel Tower was stunning, the museums were full of paintings that made me cry, but I spent the whole time missing Jude and his family, and my brother, who wasn't answering my texts or calls. I came down with food poisoning after our teacher took us to a sketchy restaurant, and I ate slimy-looking clams that tasted like regret. One girl, Ashley, puked all over her seat on the plane ride back, and the smell made 5 other kids sick. Our teacher, Mrs. Henderson, almost had a nervous breakdown and threatened to quit teaching. But it was my brother's lack of contact that contorted my gut into knots tighter than any food poisoning. I texted him almost 50 times over the duration of 3 days, and I didn't even get a read receipt. The messages just sat there, delivered but unread, mocking me. Something was wrong. I could feel it. When I returned home, jet-lagged and exhausted, I was relieved to find Jude perched on a daffodil in the yard. The flower was fresh, bright yellow, and he sat on a petal like a throne. He seemed quieter than normal, and I admit, as a 10-year-old kid, I wanted him to miss me. I wanted him to light up and fly circles around my head, and tell me how excited he was for me to be back. Jude didn't speak much at all that night. I remember it was summer, late June, and I spent most of the afternoon and evening hanging out with him in the yard, but he barely said 2 words. His light was dimmer too, flickering like a candle in the wind. Eventually, when I poked him gently, offering him honey, he was obsessed with honey, said it was the fairy equivalent of getting high, made them feel warm and euphoric. He opened up to me, hopping onto my outstretched palm. "My friends are disappearing," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. I noticed he was glowing brighter now, but in a bad way. All of the color drained from his cheeks, dark circles prominent under his eyes like bruises. His hands were shaking. He sighed, laying down in my palm like he couldn't hold himself up anymore. I liked that he trusted me enough to be vulnerable, to show weakness. Jude once told me his father was against him talking to humans, that the king saw us as parasites, and evil, looming, monstrous things that destroyed everything we touched. "Dad thinks it's a human?" Jude sighed, rolling around in my palm, pressing his face into his arms like he was trying to hide. I told him it's not. "Humans are nice. I have 2 human friends." He said it in the gentlest of tones, and I could tell it really did hurt him to defend us, to go against his father's teachings. "I'll be king in a month, so Dad doesn't want me to explore anymore. He wants me to stay in the kingdom, learn to rule, stop fraternizing with—" He trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. "Monsters?" I supplied quietly. "I don't think you're monsters," Jude said firmly, sitting up. "You and Ross have been kind to me. That's more than I can say for most of my own kind." Jude didn't say goodbye that night. I think he was too emotional, too overwhelmed. He just told me it was nice knowing a friendly human, before hopping off my wrist and flying away, a single buzzing light, disappearing into the trees behind our house. I watched until I couldn't see him anymore, until the darkness swallowed him whole. I was determined to find his missing friends. It became an obsession, the only thing that mattered. So, I did what I could. I set honey traps all over the yard, little caps filled with golden honey stolen from our kitchen, trying to lure them out from wherever they were. I figured they had run away from home, scared of whatever was hunting them. I had the naive idea that finding them would bring Jude back, and my kindness would prove humans are good, that Jude's father was wrong about us, that we weren't all monsters. I drew up plans in a notebook, mapping out the yard, marking where I'd found fairy dwellings before, trying to create a search pattern. I spent hours on my hands and knees, calling out softly, checking under every leaf and rock. Ross had been quiet ever since I got back from France. He said he was doing homework in his room, but when he bothered checking, he was curled up under his blankets with a flashlight, the beam illuminating his shadow on the wall. When I asked what he was doing, he held up a copy of Carrie by Stephen King, the cover creased and worn. "I'm reading," he grumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Leave me alone." So I left him alone, thinking he was just being a moody preteen. Jude's friends were nowhere to be seen. I gave up halfway through summer vacation, when it was clear Jude wasn't coming back, and I was wasting my time searching for fairies that were either dead or had fled far away from our yard. It had been months since I'd last seen him, and I had spent the majority of the time when I wasn't searching for the missing fairies playing with my new friends from school. Kids whose parents had steady jobs and paid their electric bills on time. I didn't tell them about Jude, or the fairies, or even where I lived. I was embarrassed of our neighborhood, of our house with its peeling paint and overgrown lawn. I was embarrassed of our broken gate that hung at an angle, our uncut lawn that was almost up to my knees, and my mother's refusal to actually be a parent. With these new friends, I could be a whole other person. Frankie without the father who left, without the alcoholic mother. Frankie whose brother hadn't spoken to her in weeks, who was growing distant and strange. However, when my friends were pulled inside for dinner by parents who actually cooked meals, I had no choice but to return home. With Jude, the darkness had been bearable. I could forget that I hadn't washed my hair in weeks because we didn't have money for shampoo, or that the other girls in class were already pointing out lice crawling in my hair during gym class, their faces twisted with disgust. With Jude, I could forget about all of that. His light made everything better. Without him, without my parents and brother and grandma, I was starting to feel empty, hollow, like I was disappearing too. I stepped inside my house one August evening, surprised by the unfamiliar light of the TV. It was on, actually on, playing some game show where people spun a wheel and guessed letters. Mom was passed out on the couch, the old lamp glowing brighter than ever. The fridge light was on, the water cold, the shower hot electricity was finally back. I felt happy for the first time in months. Upstairs, Ross played video games, his room bright. I noticed a strange glow under his blanket. He said his flashlight was broken. When he smiled at me, it felt like old times. But in my room, my lamp was too bright. Then I heard tiny screams. Inside the shade, fairies were taped to the bulb, their wings burning, their bodies melting as they shrieked. I pulled one free Yuri, Jude's brother. His skin was charred, one eye gone, his body still glowing faintly. Ross walked in, face blank. He snatched Yuri from me and crushed him in his fist, golden light leaking through his fingers. Then he taped Yuri back to the bulb, tightening it as the fairy twitched weakly, still alive. Ross turned to me, and I remember my brother's eyes terrified me. They were empty, cold, like looking at a stranger wearing my brother's face. "You said you wanted light," he snapped, gesturing to the lamp. "So I got us light. What's the problem?" I tried to protest, tried to free Jude's brother, reaching for the lamp. Ross shoved me hard into the wall, and my head cracked against the corner, stars exploding in my vision. "If you touch them," he spat, his face inches from mine, "I will fucking kill you. Do you understand me?" I tried to get past him. I tried to save Jude's brother, shoving Ross aside and reaching for the lamp again. This time, Ross was faster. He snatched Yuri up, his movements quick and practiced, and shoved him in his jeans pocket like Yuri was a coin or a piece of trash. He treated them like toys, like objects. "We have light." That's what Ross kept saying, over and over like a mantra. "They're giving us light, Frankie. Isn't this what we wanted? To see? To not be afraid of the dark?" But he was fucking hurting them, killing them. They were people. "We have electricity," I tried to say. "We don't need. We'll lose it again," Ross screamed. "Mom will forget to pay the bill or drink away the money, and we'll be in the dark again. But with them, we'll always have light. Don't you get it?" When Ross locked me out of the house again that night, refusing to let me in when I pounded on the door, I tried to call to Jude. I sat in the yard, whispering his name into the darkness, begging him to come back. I was ashamed of my brother, terrified of what he'd become, but lying to Jude felt wrong. He deserved to know. His brother was dying. But Jude never came back. The yard remained dark and empty. Fortunately for me, all children get bored and move to the next thing. Their attention spans are short, their interests fleeting. After spending weeks torturing fairies, for light, Ross got bored with them. Or maybe he just ran out of fairies to catch. My brother started hanging out with friends from school, normal kids his age, and spent less time at home. So, when I had the opportunity, when Ross was at a sleepover, I freed every single fairy I could find and tried to help them, nursing them back to health as best I could. I made tiny beds from cotton balls, gave them drops of honey and sugar water, tried to clean their burns with dampened Q-tips. Some of them were too far gone, their bodies shutting down, but they seemed grateful for the gentleness. 15 fairies survived out of 25. I only remember several of their names. Lyra, who had been my brother's nightlight, taped inside the lamp on his bedside table. Fora, who was glued to the kitchen bulb with super glue that I had to carefully dissolve with rubbing alcohol. Jax and Svan, twins who looked identical, found inside my brother's bedside light, tangled in wires. Yuri was dead. I won't describe what was left of him, because doing so would be disrespectful to his memory. I buried him in the yard with the others, 10 tiny bodies wrapped in tissue paper, and said a prayer for them. I wasn't religious, but it felt right. The TV was still switched on when I slumped onto the couch next to my unconscious mother. The television confused me, because I was sure it was supposed to take a single fairy per electrical appliance. That's what Jude had said. But when I checked the outlet behind the TV, unplugging it and peering inside, there were no fairies. Nothing. I had saved every fairy I could find, and every time I freed one, my house was noticeably darker. The lights dimmed, flickered, struggled, but the TV kept working. The refrigerator kept running. My brother's PS4 still powered on. We still had electricity, weak, flickering, but present. So, what was causing it? Hesitantly, my hands shaking, I crept down to the basement where the generator was the old electrical box that Dad had installed years ago. The basement was supposed to be off limits, but nothing was really off limits anymore. Already I could hear it, the furious buzzing of wings, sharp cries of pain that made my teeth ache. Jude was strapped to the machine, wires piercing his body, his light fading, one wing torn off, the other barely hanging. When I tried to free him, the wires were buried deep. Ross had turned him into a battery. Jude could barely breathe, blood dripping from his nose and ears. I whispered his name, but he didn't answer. His body burned with fever until finally, he went still. His light flared once, then died. Mom woke that night and demanded to know what we'd done. When I told her Ross had killed the fairies, she screamed and burned her garden, warning me the fairies would come for us. "They'll hunt you," she cried, "if you gave them your names." Years later, Ross was found dead. Something had burrowed into his brain. Then my stepbrother Harry died the same way. But hours later, Sarah called saying he was fine and coming home. I knew she was lying. Now I hear buzzing under my door, orange light glowing. "Frankie," Harry says, voice strange and wrong. "Let me in. The doorknob is turning." I locked it. I know I did.